Hello, welcome to Life Unpotted. This is Sophie here. If you are returning to this podcast, we have not recorded in a few months. I think it's actually probably been 7 or Daisy, how many months has it been? 7?
It's been since June 20th, my birthday. So like 8 months, I think. 8 months, yeah. That's closer to a year than a few months.
So almost a year because it's February now. February 27th, 2025 is the date we're recording this. And we started Life Unpotted and we recorded for 2 years straight, which is pretty crazy to realize that now. And the time away from this podcast was much needed for a multitude of reasons, which we'll probably end up getting into in this episode. But most importantly, I just feel really excited to be back. I feel like there has been a ton of lived experience in my life. There's been a ton of expansion creatively, or really a deepening, I would say, into this conversation we've been having, which really, to summarize, is the understanding that your mind is not reality. And it's been really cool, I'd say, over the past few months to deepen into, okay, so we have this understanding. We know what this means, but how does that manifest in your life? And for me, I ended up starting to make art, beautiful artwork that kind of came out of nowhere. And I started writing music, started learning the guitar again, started writing a book. So there's been a lot of creative outpour, a lot of creative expression on my end. And I'm really excited to talk about that. And I'm just excited to be back. So thank you for joining. Thank you for being here. And Life Unpotted means so much to me. And that's another thing I've realized from this break is that it is a vehicle, it is a place to relax, to express, and to ultimately move outside of your mind and into the moment.
Cool. Thanks for that intro, Soph. It feels funny to have the mics back up because it's kind of like when you play a sport your whole life and then you graduate school and you don't play it anymore. Then you go back to playing it and you're like, this is like old hat. I know how to do this, but I'm a totally different person than the last time that I did this. And I think having space away from anything that you do, it just allows for appreciation and reflection and needed growth and needed personal reflection without it being in like a public forum, because there's only so much you can express and talk about if you're not having stillness and quiet within yourself. And there was a lot that led us to pause it because 2 years is a long time to do something on a weekly basis. And it feels good to revisit this knowing that it's really a place for us to reflect on our life, our learnings, a place to explore these topics that we have visited on the podcast. One being, I just picked up a book that I haven't read in a long time by Michael Singer, The Surrender Experiment. And all of these lessons that I've learned in the past about identifying our separation between ourselves and our thoughts as a way to appreciate what's around us kind of came flooding back. And that's why I'm excited to be on the podcast again, because it's a place to understand what's going on inside and a place to express, and expression is so important. And there's so many different ways to do it, but doing it in a form of talking is great and it feels good. So I'm excited to be back and don't know where it's going to lead, but I feel good about it. And thank you all for being back. If this episode's a surprise, it's a surprise to us too, because we've been saying we're going to record for the last couple of months and we didn't want to force it. We wanted it to kind of naturally unfold because that's the approach I want to take with the podcast. In reflection, when we were doing the podcast for 2 years, it got to a point where there was a force with it. There was like a rigidity. There was like a intensity with it. And I'm excited to revisit this with a new eyes and new excitement. So thanks for being here, and pass it back to Soph.
It's so interesting you say that because I feel like I was feeling called to talk about how much resistance I experienced to pause the podcast. Like I remember when you were like, I think we should take a break. It kind of felt like my life was over. I couldn't conceptualize taking a break. It was really hard for me to understand why we needed to take a break. And that's because I care so much about this podcast. And it's been such a vehicle for me to connect with myself, and not to mention the community of people I've connected with through. And it's been so beautiful. But on that note, letting that resistance unfold and allowing myself to experience how much I was holding on to needing to continue the podcast. And the podcast is just an example, a really good example. But really, the larger picture here is when something in life is reaching the end of its duration, whether that is a relationship on a really broader scale, or a job, or really the way in which you interact with your life on a daily basis. So, something for me that I have noticed over the past 7 or so months not having the podcast, I am still living off of savings that I've accumulated from my old job, and I am working on creative work now besides the podcast. So I have really had a lot more space. Once I stopped the podcast, it was like I was kind of on my own. Like, I didn't have that anymore. And I was probably about a year and a half from when the time I left my job. So it was this really new period of discovery, or self-discovery, really, in the way in which I operate throughout the day. And something I learned was, oh my God, my body is constantly so anxious, and it is so anxious that I am unable to separate that anxiety. I'm unable to see that anxiety that I'm experiencing is leading me to do a bunch of things out of a mental habit in my head that does not reflect what I actually want to do. So in short, over the past 7 or so months, I feel like I am existing in the most at ease place I ever have. And that doesn't mean life has not been chaotic, but what it means is that I am not forcing anything. How does one not force something? How do we not force things? It's a continuous returning back to what is in front of me right now, and then the connection to what is my body telling me. I think what's so interesting about this topic really is that there's no verbal word that my body tells me to do something. It's just a knowing. And I have spent so much time in stillness and in quiet. I saw a quote today in the meditation I was doing. It was, silence is not the absence of anything. It is the existence of everything. It has been so beautiful to experience what occurs when you're still. And for me, it's like, wow, I'm writing a music album right now, or I'm writing a book, or all this art has poured out of me. And none of that came from forcing, and none of that came from really action at all. It came from the opposite. It came from a level of, I surrender to this universe, to everything I'm connected to the reality that the perception I have of life, of being separate from this entire ecosystem, is not reality. And it's been a really, really interesting experience to witness that I imagine that will unfold throughout these episodes, just like what that was like. There were times where like I just watched my body shake to release the tension. Like, it feels good to be in my body, I guess.
Would you say that you're reflecting on the time that you haven't been podcasting, and what that energy that you put into the podcast, what it manifested into? Because what I hear is like you kind of just started talking about where you're at now, and it's an interesting thing to show up of 8 months later, here I am. But it's like there's not context, but like that's okay, because it's like not really about the context. I think it's like the point you were saying is that you took your energy from one thing and you didn't know where to put it, and all these other things manifested. Like you started drawing, you started playing your guitar a lot, and there was a lot of resistance with that. Like starting anything new, there's a lot of resistance. And I think I want to go back to also when you said we had the conversation about like pausing the podcast and how you had a lot of resistance to that. I look back at the last times we were recording, and we both had a lot of tension with the podcast, I think. about how much we cared about it. And there was a lot of anxiety on my end of making sure things were right and good. And I feel like from my perspective now, that's more relative, what's right and what's good. It's more so we're enjoying it and we're flowing with it. And it's a privilege to be able to express verbally. That's what I've learned. So going back to what you said about having resistance to stopping it, I think we are both over identified with having the podcast, or maybe like over reliant on having the podcast. So I think when something that you're over reliant on is taken away, you have to look back to yourself, and that can feel really scary, really chaotic. The same way, like you said, like the podcast ending for us was kind of the same thing as like a relationship ending or a job ending, something that's so closely intertwined with your life that when you lose it, it's almost like you have an identity crisis. And I think that's probably what happened on like a small scale, because we've been doing this for 2 years. It was a huge part of our relationship. It was a huge part of the direction we were going in. It kind of allowed us to drop into a certain space, a certain cognitive understanding, or maybe like above that, spiritual understanding of what it means to exist in a peaceful way. So I think that we had almost like squeezed all the juice out of the podcast of getting into that experience that we could. We had to find other ways to fill ourselves up. And for you, that manifested in you going into like these more artistic routes. And that's led to a lot of things like you just shared. And for me, that led into a spiral of understanding where my career was going and what direction that was, and has manifested into me doing podcast freelance work for podcasters who are looking to start a podcast, podcasters who are looking to have someone manage their podcast. And that's a whole other topic that we'll go into. But I think I just so closely identified with the podcast. I was so much of me, and then losing it, I didn't really know what was leading me forward anymore, especially after moving and having all these aspirations with the podcast and realizing the podcast is just a manifestation of our life and our relationship and our conversations we have. So if all of those things aren't in check, the podcast doesn't exist. And we can't force the podcast to exist unless we are filling our lives up with the right things. So I think just in short, to revisit this podcast and how we got here in the first place was because we had curiosity, we had excitement, we wanted to learn and grow, and you should always be inspired and excited. And there always should be a balance of, if there's stress with what you're creating, it's time to pause. That's what I'm learning. Like we were really trying to crank out as much juice as we could with this. And I think as we continue to podcast, a lot of the lessons from like a lot of like the internal experiences we've both had from pausing the podcast will probably come out as we continue to podcast. So I'm curious to get to that point and understand what that looks like, because I'm still figuring that out, and it feels good to be back in this space.
It's so nice that we're talking about this right now. Okay, so first and foremost, I think right now we're really highlighting in general what was happening towards the end of the podcast. And from a broader analogy, because it's not just a podcast, it's what happens when you try to force something. And like, it's so interesting because you're using this analogy like squeezing the lemon, trying to get as much juice out. That's kind of how we were ending it. Really, like we would start recording, like there was so much tension between us, but we had to keep doing it because it became habitual. It became something that we were doing because we didn't even know why we were doing. And it's so interesting to think about when we first started the podcast, like you're saying, is with excitement, curiosity, being open, the recognition that none of what we think about life is true. And all of a sudden, the podcast became a place for stress, for anxiety, for control. And it was like the whole point of this conversation was to talk and to express in a way where we're not trying to control anything, in a way where we're dropping into our beings and dropping into a place of relaxation. So I think what is so fascinating about that is after we stopped the podcast, like you're saying, I did have we call it identity crisis, but I felt like my life unraveled and spiraled out of control. Really, in hindsight, what I think that was when I took away something I was clinging so hard to, that's no longer in the room. Okay, so I can no longer use that as something to distract me from the reality of what I'm experiencing. So, what is the irony of a podcast, which is about connecting to yourself, really connecting to not yourself, to the reality of you don't exist in the way that you think you do. What exists is this present moment. That something like that can become a place where, and there's no malintention here, it's just that I got caught up in it. I got caught up in my mind again. I got caught up in my mind again. And when we stopped the podcast, that was revealed to me of oh my God, I am so incredibly anxious. Why couldn't I even feel comfortable stopping it? That in and of itself, I was talking about this in therapy yesterday. It is so hard to see ourselves. It is so hard to see the way in which we might be controlling and clinging and really just be living on autopilot. So what are red flags to look out for? What are good data points? Like for this, it would be when I'm holding on to anything so strongly that stopping it makes me feel like my life is over. Like it's not the podcast anymore. It's not that. It's the emotions that are behind that I clearly haven't known how to work through. So it's just so interesting now to be at a point where I'm able to reflect on that period, which is really real. And then also see like it was a really painful period of uncertainty, of just so many emotions got brought up again. And for the first time, it felt like I was kind of back in who I was before all of this. Just angry, frustrated, controlling to myself. Like these are all things I'm doing to myself, right? Not to anyone else. So yeah, it's really interesting.
I want to hit on the identity crisis piece again because this had become so much of my identity of how I understood who I was in the world that stopping it, I didn't have anything else that was moving me forward in life that was exciting to me. So it led me down this path of trying to figure out the uncertainty as well, trying to replace this podcast, trying to find meaning in my life, trying to find momentum in my life. And that was a painful period. That was painful to go through and have all this doubt while I'm trying to put eggs in one basket of putting myself on Upwork and at first charging basically nothing to do work. And then the pain of being like, this is what's happening in my life right now. This is really hard to accept that this is where I'm at right now. But I kept going. I probably started doing this in October. And to look back at where I'm at now I have 4 clients. I'm making almost $2,000. It's crazy that that's where I'm at, considering that when I first put myself on Upwork, I was going through the thoughts of, how do I get a client? Oh my gosh, who am I to think that I can be doing this? Why would anyone hire me? I'll do $3 an hour, doing all these things that just didn't feel good, but I didn't stop. And recently, I've been getting a lot of inflow of clients, and all of the clients that I have actually found me. And there has been this recognition that there are certain clients that when they reach out, I have a resistance to, but I've set this rule with myself that no matter who reaches out to me, I'll always have a call with them and go from my intuition if I should work with them from there. And it made me think of the Surrender Experiment when I talked with a client a few days ago and I had resistance to it. And then I talked with them and we hit it off and it was really great. And we ended up starting to work together. And this idea of Michael Singer's Surrender Experiment popped into my head where he said all of these opportunities started to appear to him. And even if he didn't feel particularly excited about them or didn't really want to do them, he used his will to follow what the universe had put in front of him as an opportunity. And that was really what he modeled the book, The Surrender Experiment, after, was the process of the little notes that the universe gave to him, the opportunities that appeared to him, he just said yes to. So, of course, me having that thought after talking to this client, I picked up the book and all of these memories flooded back of me reading this before. And it was a relief to revisit this because what a way to live life, to realize that we can only control so much. But I want to read something that he wrote, and it's just really short. He says, if the natural unfolding of the process of life can create and take care of the entire universe, is it really reasonable for us to assume that nothing good will happen unless we force it to? So this idea of having to force something to happen in order to have something good happen is something that when I started freelancing, it took me back to when I started my career of thinking I had to force everything. Everything was in my control. Everything was up to me. Every detail, every little moment I had to be thinking about work. All of my anxiety would get projected onto work. All of this came back up to me when I started basically a new career. And what that meant for me was that I had to rework through this stuff. So coming to this idea that we don't know where we're going to end up tomorrow. We can use our human will to make decisions that seem best fit for today, but ultimately we don't know. So what a relief for me to come back to that thought and realize that I'm not sitting here controlling what's going to happen in the future. I'm just making decisions as they arise and need to be decided upon. And I don't have to carry the weight of the world. So it's really nice to reflect on this because it's all really new. And I think it's helpful to understand that we are a little piece of a much larger ecosystem that's already happening and already at play. And we just have to play our role and we don't have to overthink it. And we don't always know what's best for us. We don't always know what we want. And what a relief that we don't have to make all of those decisions, that we get to use our will to what shows up in front of us. And we just go with that.
I think something that has been so interesting to watch from the time you put yourself out there in Upwork and started getting all of these clients was how aligned the clients were with you. Like one of your clients has a healing podcast, and that's not a coincidence that that happened. And it's making me think about The Alchemist that you finished reading. I didn't finish reading. But in that book, he talks about his personal legend, really, which is following his dreams, following his heart in what he's creating in this life or what he's building in this life or really what he wants out of this life. And something I have realized so profoundly is that nobody else is on your path. Nobody else is in this being as you. Let's say like season 2 of the podcast, we didn't have seasons, but like that era was me really realizing we're all connected. We are all part of this ecosystem. We are all one in that sense. An interesting shift for me that's happened is there's that recognition, and that recognition is there. But at the same time, I am this being in my body. I did come from my parents, right? Like there is a truth in which I am residing in this vessel of my body and you're residing in the vessel of your body. We can have shared experiences and shared conversation, but I will never be in your body in that sense. Yes, like there is consciousness and we're experiencing in the same consciousness, but for the point of this, I had a really, really deep moment of reckoning with myself of there's absolutely nothing I have to worry about because a flower will bloom as a flower simply because it is a flower. And so too, with me and with my being, it is not about taking any action to do anything, but really the inaction of surrendering to what is my body guiding me to? What am I really called to? And that manifested as music and art and writing for me right now. That probably will evolve. So I say that because when I think of you, Daisy, and like you putting yourself on Upwork and then naturally these clients coming to you, you guys just kind of fit in like a piece of a puzzle. Of course that's the case because there's an energetic alignment there. And that is something that has resonated with me on a level that is almost hard for me to put into words. But I have felt like I have been more perceptive of energy than ever before. And that's been really uncomfortable at times because you're aware of the energy in the room. When tension is there, it's like I feel like I'm suffocating. Like, to have that ability to be aware of energy and to be aware of what's really unfolding in your life, it's beautiful, but that doesn't mean that it's just beautiful. It means that no, you're with whatever is in front of you. You are really here in life with whatever is in front of you. So if you're in a fight with someone, it could feel like you're dying because the reality of the energetic experience that's happening in that moment is moving in such a way where that's real. Like, I have never felt so much so that so connected so deeply, and I'll probably get into this in more episodes, but it's just energy is the foundation to this existence. Everything is composed of energy on the most granular level. So it's like almost like when we're trying to control our lives, we're getting in the way of the natural energy or the natural flow of our beings that when we're kids, we're not thinking about how to be ourselves. We're not thinking about how do I be myself. We just are being in the vessel or the body in which we are already existing in. And this has come to me so many times. A flower will bloom as a flower, as it's meant to, because its roots hold all the information. So too with every single one of us. Our bodies hold all of the information that we need. So for me, I think what I've identified is it's never that, what do I want to do with my life? What do I want to do with my life? Going from being a lawyer and being in the corporate world and being in such an intense environment. Going from my intuition being very quiet. My intuition it is uncomfortably loud at this point because I have been in so much quiet and stillness that I know when my body's speaking to me. I know when something feels wrong. Ultimately, what I've come down to is how do I move forward in life? It's because I quite literally know what feels right. So going back to what you were saying, it's so too with that. Like, of course, when you put yourself out there in Upwork as you, without changing yourself, like at a job, without making yourself sound any differently, like you just let the words type in the profile you made of this is the word, truth. You are true to your being. You are true to yourself. You are true to your existence. So of course, that energetically will respond with more truth back to you.
For me, it goes back to the practice of non-resistance, something that I have totally forgotten about until this recent experience with the client and picking up the surrender experiment, because that's really what is at the core of this book. So I'm going to read the reflection that opens the book and the premise of the book, because I think it's a great summary. Sitting alone in a 6-seater private jet at 40,000 feet is a very peaceful place. I fell into meditation and my mind became very still. When I opened my eyes, I absorbed the tremendous difference in my environment from when I had first moved out to the woods to be alone and meditate. Though I still lived in those same woods, my place of solitude had grown into a thriving yoga community, and I had become the CEO of the public corporation that life had somehow magically manifested around me. It was now perfectly clear to me that all of these life experiences, including running a business at this level, were doing as much to free me spiritually as my years of solitary meditation. Just as Hercules used the flow of rivers to clean out the Augean stables, so the powerful flow of life was cleaning out whatever was left of me. I just kept letting go and practicing non-resistance, whether I liked what was happening or not. It was in this frame of mind that I was flying off to Texas to discuss the billion-dollar merger offer for my company from a powerful CEO whom I had never met. I think the most powerful line of that stood out to me was that he said it was now perfectly clear that all of these experiences as he was having, like running a public corporation of which he has no idea how he got there because he moved to the woods to live alone and he ended up controlling this big corporation. But he said doing these things freed him spiritually as much, if not more, than his meditation practice. And I think a huge takeaway I have from this book is that the act of non-resistance in everyday life, like meditation, is an internal experience. But when we go into everyday life, the way of like actively meditating is to not resist everything. And the biggest thing for me in the past 8 months was that I started to resist everything. I started to fear everything. So the correlation I draw with this Upwork profile and having clients reach out and constantly being like, is this what I want to be doing? Is this what I want to be doing? Do I really want to be doing this? And overthinking it. But no, I understand what he meant when he said doing these things throughout my existence of what appeared in front of me and just saying yes to them are what freed me spiritually. I was reminded that when we aren't stuck in our mind just thinking about ourselves and we're just maintaining a flow in life, a lot can happen. We can really start to appreciate a lot of things when we're not so caught up in our minds. So I just wanted to incorporate that excerpt because I think it's beautifully exemplifying that no matter what we're doing, we can utilize this tactic of non-resistance to further find ourselves here in the moment. And when we're here in the moment, that's when we can laugh so hard that our stomach hurts, or that we can have so much excitement that we're jumping up and down, or that we can remember what it's like to walk outside after it just stopped raining and it's humid. And it's these experiences that are just what make life so colorful. And that is why I am most excited to be back here in the podcast. And when I say back here in the podcast is something that only happens when I allow it to happen. It can only happen if my life being a certain way, meaning I'm letting life flow a certain way, if I'm open to life in a certain way. This thing that we have here in the podcast, it's not a tangible thing of, all right, we have season 4 to go, we have season 5 to go. It's an energetic existence that allows us to show up. And from my perspective, I'm grateful we lost it, took a break from it, and I'm now back here. And that is really all we can hope for, is to come back to ourselves, or come back to the moments that we feel like ourselves the most, or really just actually existing within life and noticing the details when we walk around and experience our day-to-day lives and experiences. It doesn't have to be, I want it to be like this, or I want it to be like that. It can just be what it is, and we can enjoy it that way. So thanks for listening to my excerpt and my incorporation of the surrender experiment.
It was really beautiful at the end of reading all that when you mentioned like when you step outside after it just rained, because that's exactly what I've been realizing too. It's like as I've been going through these, what has felt like a huge unraveling the past month, I think it's just returning back to the moment and going through all the things that are keeping you from the moment. So like what happens on a mushroom trip is like you're going through all your perceptions that you have about life, basically. And I have been going through that. Well, I did take mushrooms about a month ago, which was, I felt called to plant medicine again, and I hadn't done them in a while, and I was feeling just called to them, and it was extremely, extremely insightful. But the unraveling of that, I am just kind of coming up from air, because when you are on mushrooms, you may have all the insights, but you have to have the real life application after. So when I heard you make that reference, that really resonated with me, because I feel like I've been having these moments too of, right, about a year ago when we were like doing the podcast, or before then, how I was living my life, or how I was existing in life, was peace, was experiencing the smell of the rain, experiencing the color of a rainbow, experiencing the vibrancy of the city lights, experiencing an interaction, experiencing the feeling of watching kids play in the park, and all of the life that's there. Really what it is getting to experience the beauty and the abundance of life. I just got the chills saying that, because there's so much there. And I have spent a lot of time, we'll talk about this more, but you know, the darkness and the void and that feeling, and what it has felt like was really just a continuum process of identifying what is keeping me from being right here. What has been keeping me from being right here. And there is a lot of pain in life, but on the same token, so much beauty and so much life and so much vibrancy. And I feel like the podcast, I remember like it was like each episode at the end, it was like that was always the realization. Because for me, that has to be the realization. That is, if I let myself stay in that darkness beyond the duration in which it's occurring, that is the way in which I'll live my life. You have to let yourself move forward. You have to recognize the ways in which you are creating your own suffering, because nobody else can save you. Nobody else can pull you out of there. And the experiences of pulling myself out of there, or really surrendering to the experiences of what was unfolding, have been really scary, but they have led me back to truth over and over and over again. The truest thing of this existence is what is in front of me. That is all there is. So it was really beautiful to hear that, because it just reminded me of like those moments when you come out of something and it's like that song, "This is the first day of my life. Feel like I wasn't born until I met you. I went out in the rain and everything changed." Like literally that feeling of like, whoa, I'm alive again. This is exciting. Like I have people to talk to and I have food I can eat. And look at the vibrancy of this red bell pepper in front of me. Or look at how beautiful the person's eyes I'm looking at. And look, have you ever noticed how much color is in somebody's eyes? The shape? And being able to love, and being able to love in every shape and form in whatever way that manifests. So it's really beautiful to be able to experience that. And that manifests for me from not trying to, but really letting go of all the effort I was really putting in, all the unnecessary stress I was putting in to operate. Because we don't need to try to live. We just need to live. How are we feeling? We feeling like that good place to end the episode?
I think so. Yeah, I think we talked about what we could talk about, and it feels like it's over. It does. I know. It was good to chat, and I'm curious to re-listen to this. I'm excited to listen to the episode and try to understand what we talked about and to give you all an intro, because I think something that I was frustrated with in the past when it was like record, post, was that the point of these podcasts are for kind of us to reflect. And I kind of want that process and the post-production experience of putting it together more, understanding what it is and feeling like, oh, cool, here's a package, gonna put it out. So I'm excited to listen to it, understand what it is, play with it, and understand what our posting cadence will be like. So thanks for being here. Happy that y'all have returned to the community of listening to the pod, and stay tuned.
Yep, glad to have you listening. And it's beautiful to be able to speak words into a microphone and then have them resonate in somebody's ear. So really, 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 really excited to be back. Feels like I'm at ease with it. So thank you, Daisy, for sharing this experience with me. I've enjoyed talking to you.
Thanks. It's been fun.